Welcome to the Carahsoft Data Center Innovation Series, where we dive into the trends and issues shaping the future of data centers in the public sector. I'm your host, Carahsoft Consulting CTO Scott Robon. Today, we're going to focus on building the next generation data center, and we're thrilled to have Bob Silkowitz, Director of Public Sector Sales at Vertiv, joining us to talk about what he's seeing across a wide variety of public sector and U.S. federal customers. We're all seeing this tremendous boom in the construction of data centers, both commercially and for the public sector. From the AI-driven surge in construction to strategic site selection, we'll unpack the challenges and innovations defining next-gen data centers. We'll also explore how Vertiv and Carahsoft are partnering to drive sustainable high-performance infrastructure for federal and public sector needs. Let's get started. Silk, welcome. It's awesome to have you here. Can you give listeners a brief intro and how you got into the data center space?
Thanks, Scott. Yes, I've been with Vertiv, Emerson, Liebert, the names of our companies, for the past 31 years. So I started out in this industry in the DC metro area, calling on consulting engineers, focusing on thermal products.
Sure.
I left for a brief period of time and came back to run our sales office for 21 years in the DC area. And for the past 5 years, been strictly focused on supporting all of our partners, distributors, and our offices as it pertains to the federal market.
So really, you're just getting started in this space, right? You have a lot to learn, right? Is that
Yes,
what I'm hearing?
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm still a rookie.
Yeah, no, you're a veteran, right? And you've seen a lot here. You've seen, I'm sure, quite a few fads and trends over the decades, but this surge is real. So what's happening? What's driving this next gen data center construction boom?
You know, what's really generating this big boom, everybody talks about the cloud, and the cloud, of course, is a data center. It's a computer. But, the whole AI, high performance compute today is really pushing the next gen. When I started in the data center world, high density racks were 3 kW. And, as things have developed over time, that's gone to 10, 15, 20. And the latest realm is NVIDIA can put together a rack that's 130 kW, of which they're projecting 300 to 500 to a megawatt in a single rack. So from a data center construction and development standpoint, you are now looking at data centers that aren't megawatts. We're going to gigawatts now.
Right.
In order to power this next gen of IT that's coming out to support this market.
So that concentration of energy consumption within a data center and driving site selection, as well as power distribution within a data center, they're two very tied problems, but separate issues. Tell me about the influence on site selection and location. What are you and Vertiv seeing in particular about driving in different locations in the US and even across the world? I mean, we're DC metro area folks, right? We've seen the gray windowless buildings populate the landscape for a couple decades here. But there's a lot going on outside of the DC metro. What are you talked about that?
100%. When the internet first started, you had May East and May West. Those, and they still are the two hubs of the internet. One being in Ashburn, Virginia, like you said, we've seen those buildings pop up.
The crossroads of the internet. Yep.
100%. But now it's okay, we're out of power here.
Right.
So the data centers are popping up. Where is there power and where do we have dark fiber? Follow the train tracks of the United States. We're distributing products via rail. Those are great pathways for fiber.
Sure.
So you're seeing new markets in Salt Lake City and Phoenix and Dallas and Austin, Atlanta, Kansas City, Ohio. You're getting areas down in southeastern Virginia where you have cable landing stations that are coming from across. And then, yes, go across the globe. In EMEA, in Asia, anywhere now where there's density of people, there's people utilizing the web for whatever they're doing, there's a data center need there and collect data. Data is the next big piece too. While it's not a high power usage piece, there is so much data being collected today that it needs a place to go and to be analyzed.
Yeah, that's a whole separate episode on telemetry generation and data generation issues and processing all all that information, right? But that's driving storage issues and compute as well. We'll talk about more on that on future episodes. So you've mentioned some key metro areas. I would add Atlanta. I hear Atlanta has a lot of construction going on there too. You have different power availability, energy availability, and cooling profiles in those different locations. What does that do in your thinking and how you help data center construction facilities and managing those issues?
So cooling first and foremost, that's we've got to cool these large loads that are coming in. And believe it or not, with direct to chip cooling today, that process, while it is difficult, isn't as difficult as people say because the temperatures by which chips operate on is a little bit higher. So
Mm-hmm.
we have the ability now, to maybe utilize some existing infrastructure cooling, but power is power. If I'm doing a design at 10 kW and all of a sudden I'm at 100, 130 kW, that's a huge percentage increase.
And if it's per rack, but for
That's
listeners' context, right? Yep.
per rack. So like I said, gigawatts. So, what local municipalities have power? The talk of solar, wind, gas turbines, and even nuclear have come into
Sure.
the folds these days. We think nuclear is probably at least 5 years out from becoming more mainstream, and
Right.
that's more towards regulation, not in terms of safety and clean power,
Sure.
but having the regulations to do it. We've seen some of the big hyperscale people reload up and restart some very famous large nuclear plants in the United States in order to get that power. I've
Oh,
heard of them
Constellation Energy up in Pennsylvania and one of the 3 Mile Island idle reactors.
100%.
Yep. Yep.
Those are the two big ones there.
Yep.
I've talked to another developer that's actually bringing in, 0.5 megawatt gas turbines
Wow.
to power up a potential data center because they have gas, and gas in the Pittsburgh area, which is where this data center is looking to go, is pretty cheap. So that's an easy way to do it, and then use utility as a backup.
Right. And
So
do you see how much of the driver is like diversity in power availability for selection criteria? Like I would think you wouldn't want to be stuck, like obviously with just solar or just wind because of availability issues, but you'd want a diverse set of inputs for your energy consumption for a given facility.
I would say it's more on a reliability factor and
Okay.
what you're marketing for that data center, where you've
Mm-hmm.
got solar, wind, or green, and there's a lot of people want to utilize green power for whatever the reason is.
Right.
I think it's more of a reliability factor. As you get up into the tiers of a data center design and how much reliability and redundancy do you need, it's going to be not necessarily, am I using solar? Am I using wind? Am I using nuclear? Where's my A feed coming? Where's my B feed coming from my data center? What's my expansion capabilities within those
Sure.
two realms as well?
And I would tie diversity in power generation directly to the reliability issue because I want to keep operating the facility and make sure that if something happens to my wind generation capability, my liquid natural gas capability, or even nuclear, I can still get the energy I need. Um, we also need to just tip the hat to probably many Navy listeners who are the first to point out that they've run a small modular reactor program for about 70 years without incident. And there's a population of people that have been trained, engineers that come through that program that are ready and willing to help, that be part of the energy solution. We'll touch on that a little more later too. But well, if I go back inside the walls, right, you've got this increasing density for power consumption per rack, but you've also got, more and more equipment and poundage weight within the rack. And I got to go to NVIDIA GTC a couple months ago where, Jensen Huang the CEO of NVIDIA was very, very proud of being able to put 3,000 pounds in a rack, all liquid cooled, literally no space in between, the compute slices and the networking equipment. What do you see from that perspective, from a cable management, from floor reinforcement? How does Vertiv deal with that?
All great questions on that end, because that is really part of my job right now, is to talk to end users. Of course, I focus mainly on the federal space, to educate them that if high performance compute is coming to their facility, or as an IT director, if you're looking to utilize that, you really need to know the ramifications to the facility side to
Sure.
rolling something like that out. For example, Vertiv has developed a new, I'll call it not high density from a thermal standpoint, but from a loading standpoint, the ability of a rack to hold that kind of weight first and foremost.
Right.
Number two, if you're working with raised floor environments, is my raised floor infrastructure capable of handling that weight?
Sure.
That's just the physical nature of the structure itself. Then you start getting into, what does it look like above my rack today?
Mm-hmm.
Today, if you look in a data center, you'll have some cable tray, maybe there's some busway, maybe some power. When you start looking at high performance compute and the infrastructure above the cabinets, we've developed something called Smart Run, which is an infrastructure piece, comes in 8-foot sections, that has 2 sets of water piping, 2 to 4 sets of busway, plus any of your cable management, and fiber 100%. And there's always potential to have copper in the data center still.
Yep.
So you think about that infrastructure above the rack. Most data centers today are being built on slab. And we've had a couple chats with some federal end users on that end. And I said, the market's going that way for a couple reasons. Number one, it reduces my slab to slab height, so it's cheaper to build. Mm-hmm. Number two, you have more usable square foot in the data center because there's no ADA requirements. I don't have ramps I need to consider when I'm building the data center. So that's usable square footage today. And because we're going direct to chip, because we have in-row cooling, we're bringing the cooling closer to the loads. The raised floor environment isn't needed as much anymore.
Well, and so that's great if it's new construction and you can plan for that, right? Because you have a higher load bearing capacity when it's direct to slab. But I'm sure you see lots of retrofitting and upgrade from existing facilities. So what are the things that you have to talk your customers through when you've got a raised floor environment, and how do you help customers navigate that?
So we look at it from a couple realms. First of all, what is the kW per rack we're designing for within the data center? What are my capacities within the existing set of data center from a thermal standpoint? Can I utilize the raised floor cooling? Because any one of these racks that's deployed for high performance compute, it's usually an 80-20 rule. 80% of the cooling will be handled by the direct to chip, 20% is going to be air. So can I utilize some of the existing infrastructure to handle that air portion of it? Then it's, can I support whatever I'm putting in the data center?
Sure.
How much upgrade to the floor, to the stands under the floor, do I need to put together? And, after we figured out cooling, we figured out floor loading, how are we going to deal with this increase in power? For example, we're working with a client right now where they want a proof of concept. So we have a small 100 kW liquid heat exchanger that can go in the rack, and they can test the concept of this whole liquid cooling scenario just to see what it looks like, test a couple chassis in a rack. But then the next question is, what if I build this out and I add 2 megawatts of high performance compute to this data center?
Right.
What does that do to my UPS system? What implication does that have to my chillers? Do we want to roll this all out and have its own separate infrastructure to support just the high performance compute and leave the rest of the, call it normal data center loads, on their own systems?
Sure, sure. And you must have like a mix of customers that we're just going to take this section and we're going to upgrade that for the new infrastructure, and we're going to leave this stuff alone because you have to do things in phases and sections, right? You can't, it's probably pretty rare to just like, well, the data center is going to be down for 6 weeks while we upgrade it. Like not a viable migration strategy.
No, and it's also interesting too because we have to work with clearances in terms of what level of security clearance is a particular rack and where is
Oh,
it in the
sure.
data center, what my separations are. So that takes it even to another level. Well, maybe a commercial client can put everything single row and doesn't care what's where. We also have to take into account, what is the mission of that IT stack?
Sure. Yeah. And that's a whole other layer of complexity, right? In the design and execution for sure. Let, let's
100%.
let's touch on liquid cooling just a little more. Are we using water for cooling chips? Or are we using new liquids? And what challenges does that present for you?
Yes. How's that for a great answer? Yes to all.
Excellent. Excellent.
So right now, everything is water to water because up to about 130 kW, that's where, we have heat exchangers that are taking primary water from some source, and there's a secondary loop in the data center. And that heat exchanger provides a couple jobs within the data center. Number one, we want to keep the temperature of that secondary side above dew point. Water in the data center, not a good thing. It's also a safety factor too. If someone happens to hit that piece, we're only
Yeah.
draining a certain portion of it. But to your question, we don't know what the secondary side is going to be for the future. We work hand in hand with the major chip manufacturers today because
Sure.
they want us to know what's coming, and then we need to figure out how to cool it. We think on the secondary side of stuff coming up, it'll be some probably low GWP refrigerant on the secondary side as a guessing standpoint.
Okay.
Because I think to do some of these higher density applications, we're going to need a phase change in there in order to make that cooling happen.
Sure.
But I'm not 100% sure on exactly what those materials are, what those fluids are, but it won't be too long till we find out because I think Jensen had talked about either by the end of this year, beginning of next, they'll be at 300 kW in Iraq.
Yeah, and I know, from conversations with you guys that you're planning beyond 300 kW per rack as well. Because if you're going to build something today, you need a lifetime out of that facility, right? And if you can see beyond the 300 kW per rack, you've got to be able to accommodate it. Let me throw one other thing at you, and I know this isn't high on the list, but many of these systems have a high degree of network connectivity to them. It's not like a single or just dual connectivity to a given device. I might have 11, 12, 13 different types of optical and copper cables to a given system. And that can get messy really quickly. How much of a challenge has that been for what you're doing and helping your customers?
Cable management has been the bane of our thermal existence since I've been at the company.
Interesting.
Whether and it becomes a practice that needs to be followed at whoever the end user is. There needs to be MOPS for everything that happens, and more so even today, just like you talked about. But the rack configurations are getting different. And what do I mean by that? The piping connections could be at the front of the servers now. So imagine your servers in a rack, but now my internal rack manifolds are in the front.
Right.
That leaves my back for power and cable management. So the whole configuration of the rack, but that brings up the next point is the racks are getting bigger.
Sure.
So when you talk about space planning, you're not just in a standard 600 by 1200 by 42U. You could be in a 1200 or 1400 millimeter wide rack by 48U by 1200 or even 1400 millimeters deep. So now your whole space planning within the data center changes because you're putting a lot of stuff into a smaller box, and
Yep.
we need room exactly for what you talked about. I need room for the rack manifolds. I need room for rack PDUs now that are going to put 72 kW in a single rack PDU. And we don't even know what that power distribution looks like in the future.
Sure.
Plus all the cable management.
So, my old school experience, I'm used to 19-inch and 23-inch racks, right? The standard IT 19-inch and 23-inch telco. This might not sound like a big deal to the casual listener, but changing those standard dimensions for a rack and implications that has on space planning and equipment planning for a given data center, that's not trivial, right? And you must have good like electronic tools to help you plan square footage, or are you old school? Are you still drawing on vellum? How do you do it, Bob?
We have a lot of references.
Hang on a sec. Come closer. You've gotten really quiet.
No, so we have a lot of reference designs for clients. And we're starting to do that so people understand the implications associated with dropping something like this into a data center, where let's just say most of the data centers are on raised floor. Those are 2-foot square tiles. It was very easy when I had a 600 millimeter wide rack, 2 feet wide, 1200 millimeter deep. That's 4 tiles.
Right.
Now I'm talking going 2 tiles, maybe a tile and 3/4 wide, by going more than 4 feet wide. So we do have reference designs for people to look at because I want them to see what the infrastructure looks like today. And one of the biggest changes that we didn't even talk about yet is that a lot of this cooling equipment needs to be put on the UPS, which is a change in mindset.
Sure.
Because we are running such high loads at such high temperatures, the fact that you will even stop for 1 or 2 seconds could burn these systems up. So when you're thinking about your infrastructure today, these heat exchangers need to be on UPS power. So in the event you lose power, the pumps are still working. We have a reservoir on the pipe until the chillers come back onto generator.
So another high reliability requirement that just wasn't there before, because of driving high performance, higher clock speeds on chips, and a lot more heat to be removed. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that before. So let me take just a little different angle on this. I think as we've talked in the past, one of the things I've noticed in the data center construction business is a very high proportion of former military folks. Very high speed, low drag. We have 12 months to get the facility operational. Tell me about your experience there. Are you seeing similar things, and why do you think this is?
Well, everybody that's in the military today, their purpose is to protect this country.
Right.
So everything they do is mission specific. There's timelines, there are deadlines. They are very diligent in terms of how they organize their day. What better a person to utilize in a market where we can't build data centers fast enough?
Right.
Where the time from groundbreaking to power and coordination and installation is getting shorter and shorter. What better person that understands and can deal under pressure? So
and no, I totally agree. And to be really clear, this is not just a federal and public sector high proportion, even in the commercial space, right? Folks with this mindset and skill set are needed, whether they're building these facilities for public sector consumers, the hyperscalers, and everything in between to really just get it done.
they've proven they have a work ethic.
Yep.
You're diligent in your day in the military. You get up at a certain time. You have your function for the day and the task you need to accomplish, and you have a finite time to get it done. And when they're in the military, not completing tasks, has implications to national security, and a lot of times it has implications to human life.
Yep.
So what better a mindset to have working for you? Someone that gets up every day, knows what their mission is, and is going to do everything possible to make sure that mission doesn't fail.
Totally agree. And it's been a real eye-opening experience as I've really dived in on this in the last 12 to 18 months personally. So Well, so there are so many pieces that go into the data center equation. Carahsoft and Vertiv have been partnering on this. We have a really tight relationship. What have you seen as a result of the partnership that helps you get to more customers and helps us be more aware of what's happening with what you do?
You know, I have loved the relationship with Carahsoft, and it's gone from, next to nothing to through the roof, which has
Mm,
been great because the ability for Carahsoft to take every part and piece associated with a mission critical infrastructure build is fantastic for resellers and end users. It's a place for someone to aggregate all the different parts and pieces. I mean, being that you guys were a big software, that's what Carahsoft is known for, and now you're backward integrating into everything that software resides on. What a great solution and resource to customers and resellers to be able to take the infrastructure from our side, then all the IT that goes in it, and then all the operating platforms operating on that IT hardware. And to have a single point to bring that all together, make sure the package is right, figure out financing and billing and whatnot so it matches the contract at hand has been awesome.
yep. I could not have said that better myself. I owe you a beverage of your choice for that well articulated value prop. I will say from my perspective, I love seeing all the puzzle pieces that Carahsoft has access to from a technology component, contracts, financing across the board. And I'm a systems thinker and I love a holistic view of basically any problem set I'm dealing with. And to see all of this come together under one roof where we can help you with infrastructure via Vertiv, via various compute providers, networking providers, storage providers. There's no end in sight for what's in the toolbox and what we can help customers with together. Um, I don't want to end this without giving you an opportunity for any other big ideas or things that we haven't covered that you want to leave listeners with and what Vertiv's doing in data center. It's your opportunity to beat your chest and talk about anything else we haven't covered here today, Bob.
Well, covering public sector and covering the government, we are a US based company, headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. I think the one piece we didn't hit on was the whole modular construction market that's out there.
Sure.
We're finding, especially on the government side, there's a lot of aging infrastructure out there, not just from a technical standpoint, but from a physical building standpoint.
Right.
And just let people know that there's an option that you could actually take your compute, build it in a container, and ship it to site. And that can be done in a one by, that can be done in, like, you build a modular home, you can do a data center that way in containers. If it needs to be transported by certain devices, whether ship or air, you can design the container to meet the requirements and infrastructure of that. So just understanding that there's different ways to skin the cat, that there's
Sure.
not just one size fits all. We've had certain clients that have moved all their fiber terminations outside the building into a container. We have people where all of a sudden their data center building needs to be redone. Where am I going to put the data center? You build it in a container, and sometimes it becomes more reliable than the initial piece. So that's a huge market that's exploding today. And they can even be built to ICD standards and Tempest requirements.
Sure.
So we're not limiting ourselves to just basic compute. You also have the ability to build in secure environments.
And especially where you might have constraints on construction in a geography or at a location where putting up a new building is hard, but bringing in a container might just be a concrete slab, right? So good catch. Sorry to miss that in the conversation so far. There's a lot more you can go into detail on modular construction and anything else you've talked about here. I would highly encourage anyone with questions that want to hear more, reach out to us at Carahsoft. We'll put you in touch with Vertiv. We're happy to talk about the broader range of solutions we provide here as well. One other thing I would put out to people here is, they're listening to this conversation or they're watching us, but It really makes it real when you go see what a data center looks like. And if you're interested in touring a facility, we can connect you with other Carahsoft and Vertiv partners that are amenable to bringing people in to see what a next gen data center looks like. Please reach out if that's of interest to you. It really makes a difference when you can see the overhead racks and the cooling supply and the raised floor or direct to slab, all the things that Bob talked about during this conversation. Seeing it really is believing in this case. Well, Silk, thank you so much for coming here today. Thank you for Vertiv's partnership with Carahsoft. I've really enjoyed building my personal relationship with you and learning how we work together. We will definitely have you back for more conversation on other topics along these lines in the not too distant future.
Look forward to it. I appreciate it. This has been great.
You bet. And listeners, thank you for tuning in today. And be on the lookout for our future episodes coming in the Carahsoft Data Center Innovation Series. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.